Good morning, listeners. It is Thursday again, and time for you and I to have our little chat that we have every week and that I so enjoy. Today we are going to talk a little bit about conflict resolution. Now, normally when I say conflict, people recoil and everybody tells me, oh, I hate conflict, I hate confrontation. Of course you do. If you loved it, I would be very concerned. Most of us do not enjoy conflict, but conflict is all around us every day. Whether it's a disagreement about what to have for supper, whether it's a disagreement about where you should go on the weekend, or whether it's the more serious disagreements and conflict that we have. They're all conflict. Chicken or beef is a conflict. And so we have to learn. Again, it's a skill. We are not born knowing how to resolve conflict. We have to learn how to resolve conflict. And some of us have been fortunate enough to grow up in a home where we could observe how our parents dealt with conflict. If mom and dad could talk it through, could discuss it, and then come to some agreement, even if it is agreeing to disagree, but have a better mutual understanding, have more respect for each other, then we had the opportunity to see how they resolved the conflict. Now, of course, not everybody had that. In some homes, it's a little bit hectic and there's a lot of screaming and perhaps some foul language and slamming of doors. And of course, then the good old-fashioned, trusted bullying and manipulation. Now, those really aren't particularly good ways to resolve conflict because, as I say, conflict is part of life. It is as part of life as is breathing. There are always disagreements, and it's how we deal with those that determines the quality of our relationships and also the quality of our personal life. Because let's face it, if you can't deal with conflict, the chances are you're always just going to suck it up and do what the other person wants, whether it's a family member or a colleague at work. So there are 5 strategies, whether it's knowingly, I should say, or unknowingly, that people employ when there's conflict. Now, the first one is competition. Competition means I win, you lose. I'm right, you are wrong. And generally, there's a power dynamic involved. Of course, if there's a power dynamic involved, then it is the assertion of one person that they are more powerful, have more influence than the other, and therefore the other person has to acquiesce to what the more dominant person wants. And it's really not a win-win situation for anyone. So there's competition. I win, you lose. The next one is avoidance. It's a bit like the rhino and the hedgehog. There's an aggressive person and there's not an aggressive person. And so the non-aggressive person, as I say, will tend to avoid the conflict and go along with it, go along to get along. For the sake of peace and quiet, I will just do as he or she wants and avoid an unpleasantness. Then there's cooperation. You see yourself and the other person as a team against the problem. So let's say I want fish for supper, my husband wants beef for supper, and now I see that we are a team against the problem is what's for supper. So therefore we can discuss it, we can negotiate, we can tackle it, and maybe we'll decide we'll have pork for supper, something like that, or decide that we'll have fish tonight and beef tomorrow night. But there is a team dynamic involved with the other person. The next one, number 4, is accommodating again. One is accommodating and one is not. One is giving and one is not. And this is also, as much as avoidance and competition, a very unhealthy way. Because the one that's accommodating is always never having their needs met, never having the opportunity to say what they really want and having that listened to and, going along with that. It's always my opinion is not important. What I want is not important. I have to accommodate the other person because what they want and their opinion is far more important than mine. So you can see that those things are not healthy for a relationship. And then the last one is compromise, which is the best strategy. I state my problem, I state my needs, you state your problem and your needs, and both parties work to find a solution that is mutually satisfying. It's a little bit like cooperation, but compromise means we both give up something and we both win something. Now, this becomes a lot more technical if we're talking about conflict resolution in a commercial sense. Then, and I'm not going to get into that now because, as I say, that is a lot more technical and one has to look at a lot more that's involved. This is just your relationships with your friends, family, and perhaps co-workers. So you become curious about the situation or the problem. You find out what's really fueling it, because often what's being said or what's being blamed is not what's really fueling the disagreement. Your partner comes home and he or she, is a bit short with you and there's a conflict. But it's not really the fact that my partner doesn't like me or, is irritated with me as such. If you really find out what's behind the problem, then perhaps he or she has a bad day at work or was cut off in the traffic and that upset them. And so they come home and there is now conflict between the two of you. But that is not what really fueled it. Of course, there could be other things where it's something happened a while ago and because of your poor conflict resolution skills, it was never talked through and it was never resolved. So that is like that little grain of sand in the shoe. That's a mild irritation initially, but the longer it remains in your shoe, the more irritated you become and the more the discomfort level increases, and eventually there is a burst, the dam will burst, but that's not really what fueled it. Was something that happened some time ago. So compromise is then working together, being curious and finding out what's fueled it. And so you can see, knowingly or unknowingly, we employ those strategies. Now, as I said, my favorite is compromise, and it's a bit like the cooperation, it's teamwork. But teamwork, the subtle difference is teamwork, it's you and me against the problem. Where compromise is, I'm curious about how you see it. I'm curious about what's fueling your passion about this, and you are equally curious about where I come from. And of course, as always, the process of conflict resolution is first open, honest communication. Open and honest does not mean rude, okay? Open and honest means I tell you openly and honestly how I feel, how I experience the situation. There is no hidden agenda in my communication. There is no veiled threat in my communication. There is no reading between the lines that you have to do in my communication. It is honest, it is open, and I'm explaining it in such a way that you can understand where I'm coming from. Then, of course, the other very important side is listening. I'm explaining, you need to listen actively. Ask questions. Please tell me more. I don't quite understand why you feel that. Could you explain it to me a little bit more, please? So listening actively means you are actively participating in the conversation, even if it is just looking attentively and really listening. Because often, as we know, I have spoken to you about this before, while someone is speaking, I'm already formulating my answer, or my mind's wandering off somewhere. And so I can miss a vital piece of information, I can miss a nuance where the other person says something in such a way that would have given me the understanding of how strongly they feel about it, how hurt they are, how sad they are. But I missed that because I wasn't really paying attention. So that is very important. And then look at the options. What are the options for you and me to come to a mutually satisfying situation? So it may mean that I can't eat what I would have liked to eat tonight, or can't go and do something I would have liked to do the weekend. And it perhaps means you have to compromise on, well, we can both decide on doing something this weekend, but it means you can't either perhaps get everything you wanted. But we both feel, you know what, this is something we can both enjoy. And on another occasion, we can revisit the original suggestion. So communication is always, it's always at the heart of our human interactions. I'm sure you've heard about the 5 or 7 languages of love. There are so many different ways in which we each have a preference for expressing our love. Some people like saying it and expressing it in words. Other people like doing stuff for their significant other. Someone else likes giving gifts or, surprises. And so everybody has their own way of expressing their feelings. But the same applies to where there's conflict. We all have a default setting, and often that default setting is sulking or the cold shoulder. It could be an angry outburst, we've spoken about, again, emotional intelligence before. So important to control your emotions. Some people like to just say it as it is, and this is how I feel, and, come across unnecessarily harsh. And sometimes it's a combination of those things that somebody employs to, I want to use the expression, get their own way. And the ego, our egos so often tell us, well, if I agree, if I give in, it means you get your way and I lose. Well, maybe it is. But then you have to sit again and openly communicate with that person and say, I'm always giving in. I'm always acquiescing to what you want. Of course, if there are more serious things at fault here, let's say affairs or abuse of some sort, then that conversation has to take on a whole nother dynamic because of the seriousness of what's at heart. And perhaps in those situations, I want to say it's definitely in those situations a good idea to get professional help, because going through those things is not something we ought to go through repeatedly in life. So there cannot be a learning process. We all know when we first met our significant others, initially you can't do enough and everything they do is wonderful, and 5 years down the road, 7, 10 years, 12 years down the road, you don't feel like doing everything for the other person, and not everything they do is so wonderful anymore. And that is when there's that little rub, and where we need to be able to talk about it and openly discuss how we feel. And sometimes we feel neglected. Say, well, you used to do X, Y, and Z for me, and I used to do this, and now you don't do it, and you criticize me when I say X, Y. And that needs to be explained. So don't act out your anger, frustration, sadness. Explain it to the other person involved. I have spoken to you about before the little acronym that I use for conflict resolution, which is often OFTN. O, observe. What do I see? What have I noticed? I've noticed that every time we go and braai with friends, you ignore me. You never come and check on me. I have noticed that, you're always busy on the weekends and you never seem to have time for me. Then F for feelings. How does it make me feel? It makes me feel sad. It makes me angry. It makes me frustrated. It makes me feel unimportant. the T is for thinking. Based on the above, you then say, I think we need to put time aside. We need to find time aside to talk about that which I have observed, and put it to your partner or that person. Don't ambush them. Don't wait till he or she walks into the office or walks through the door and then you say, now we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z, and they have not had the chance to prepare their responses and to prepare how they want to explain to you how they feel and how they have perhaps experienced something. And then N is for needs. I need you to pay more attention to me. I need you to, on a weekend, at least say, you know what would you like to do? Come on, let's go and sit outside with a cup of coffee and you can tell me what you'd like to, or what happened yesterday, or whatever it is that are your shared or the other person's field of interest. You know, it is so important to say to the other person, I know you enjoy, tell me what you've learned about something that the other person, how is your gardening coming on? How is I know you're reading a book on, I don't know, UFOs. Tell me about it. Show some interest. People love to talk about themselves. And here I'm not saying, let them go on ad infinitum. But if my husband never wants to hear about my day, if my husband never asked me how I feel or what I thought of something, it would be a rather pointless relationship, wouldn't it? And the same for him. If he comes home and I see he's full of the beans and he's full of the joys of life, he wants to share that with someone. He wants to ask, I had such a nice day. I had such a wonderful experience. And gosh, you won't believe what happened. It was just so amazing. Equally, he wants to be able to unpack with someone, not load it onto me. We've talked about that before, you and I. So I'm not taking over if he's had a bad day. I'm not taking over his problems. I'm just supporting. I'm just listening. And I could then say, well, what do you think you should do tomorrow? How do you think you should handle the situation? Or, of course, that well used question. How does that make you feel? Because our feelings are so important to us as human beings. So when it comes to conflict resolution, I think what I want you to take out of it is first, acknowledge your emotions, but be able to control them. Don't act on them, explain them. Don't let your frustration, your anger, your aggression, your sulking, don't use those as weapons to manipulate and bully the other person into submission. If you are aware that you are a little bit that inclined, well, perhaps today is a good day to say, you know what, I'm going to ask that person in my life how they're feeling, how they're doing, why they're upset, etc. So don't communicate openly, listen actively, and look at the options together so you can compromise and find a way forward. So listeners, again, the acronym often: observe, feelings, thinking, needs. If you explain them, you're painting a picture for the other person, and then they more often than not understand you better, and they have the opportunity to do the same. And as I said, after a conflict in a relationship, you should have a better understanding of each other. You should have, I want to say more respect, but at least the same as you had before, depending on the way the relationship was to start with, of course. And you should be able to say, you know what, this was a positive experience. This disagreement, conflict, we did not agree on something, was a positive experience because we've learned. I've learned about myself, I've learned about you, and I've learned how to find a way forward that we're all happy with. I hope that was helpful, as always. I hope you have found something in that you can use from now, because, as I said, there will be conflict in your life. If it's not today, it will be tomorrow or very soon. And when I say conflict, I'm not talking about the the very unpleasantness of serious conflict, but just the simple things that today your teenager wants to go out on the weekend and you don't particularly want them to. It's a conflict. And yes, you can say you can have that power relation, the competition that I said, well, you're not going, and it's because I said so. And there's the power dynamic. Your child has to listen to what you have to say. That is not the best way forward, because there will come a day when they will do it behind your back. And then it's a lose-lose situation. You've lost control and your child may put themselves in a dangerous position. It is so much better to teach your children that let's sit down and talk about it. Let's sit down, tell you why, who, what, and find a way forward. Say, you know what, you can go, but I don't want you to be out till that hour at night. How about you go and I pick you up at a more reasonable hour? Whatever. You have taught your child how to negotiate. You've taught your child that it's not a win and lose situation. You've opened a door to communication that your child will respect and love you for the rest of their lives. They will trust you to know, I can go and talk to my parent about whatever it is that's going on in my life, and I know together we'll find a way forward. That is conflict resolution. That is the way where we build relationships and forge a connection that is just so precious. So listeners, I hope you enjoy that. As always, please send in your requests. I love hearing from you. Please, if you want to listen to this again or pass it on, it's on Spotify, it's on YouTube. Please give us the thumbs up, click subscribe so that it can continue on those platforms. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful end of week, a wonderful weekend, and learn from those disagreements. They're not the end of the world if you choose to find a way forward.
The radio station you can't live without. This is your radio.
This is South Coast Radio.